It started, as many things did these days, with a casual assumption delivered like a royal decree. Mom, my daughter-in-law, Clara, chirped into the phone, her voice already radiating the manufactured excitement that usually preceded a large, inconvenient request. Guess what? We're finally taking that trip to Bali. My first thought, before the specific details registered, was a flicker of mild pleasure for them. They worked hard, or at least, they claimed to work hard, often citing stress as the reason they needed frequent breaks that invariably seemed to involve me. "Oh, how lovely, Clara," I said, trying to sound genuinely pleased. "When are you going?" "2 weeks. We leave next Friday," she announced, the speed of her words leaving no room for surprise, let alone discussion. "Anyway, that's why I called. We're dropping Buster off the morning we leave. He's got enough food for 3 weeks, just needs walks and meals. And the gardener comes Tuesday, just let him in. The pool guy Wednesday. Oh, and the Amazon deliveries, just put them in the garage." Silence stretched between us. Buster was their boisterous golden retriever, a lovely dog, but one who required significant time and energy. Dropping him off meant dropping him off with me at my house. For 3 weeks. Without asking if it was convenient. Without asking if I could. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below, and if you believe families should protect, not exploit each other. Hit that like button and subscribe for more. My initial mild pleasure evaporated, replaced by a familiar, cold knot in my stomach. This wasn't a request, it was a directive. A task assigned, without consultation, because it was simply assumed I would do it. It was assumed my time, my home, my routine were entirely flexible and available for their convenience. It was another brick in the wall of casual entitlement they had been building around me for years, little by little, until she realized her own family saw her as nothing more than a source of money and free services. I was a widow, my husband Arthur having passed peacefully 5 years prior. We'd worked hard our whole lives, saved diligently, and built a comfortable life in a spacious home that was now entirely mine. Our son, David, and his wife, Clara, had always struggled financially, or perhaps, more accurately, they spent money faster than they earned it. From helping with down payments and car repairs to bailing them out of debt and covering unexpected bills, I had been their safety net, their personal bank, their free labor pool for years. I did it out of love, a deep desire to see my son happy and secure. I believed that's what family did. They supported each other. But somewhere along the line, support had morphed into expectation, and expectation into demand. My home, Arthur's and my sanctuary, had become their default storage unit, their emergency hotel, and, apparently now, their long-term pet care facility. David was a good son, I thought, but he seemed utterly passive when it came to Clara. Her pronouncements became their joint decisions, her assumptions his agreement. And her assumptions about my availability were boundless. "Clara," I began, choosing my words carefully, attempting a gentle pushback. 3 weeks is a long time. I had a few things planned. "Oh, Mom, it's just Buster," she interrupted, her voice losing its saccharine edge, a hint of impatience creeping in. "He'll be fine. He loves your big backyard. It's so much easier than boarding him, and honestly, we're really stretched with the trip cost. We just figured it was the obvious solution." Obvious solution. My back went up. The obvious solution always seemed to involve me providing something for free. The lack of consideration, the sheer nerve of arranging major pet care for 3 weeks at my home without even a polite, "Would you be able to?" was breathtaking. It wasn't just about the dog, it was about the complete disregard for my autonomy. "I understand, but I tried again." "Great. Glad that's sorted," she chirped, cutting me off definitively. "We're so swamped packing, I have to run. See you next Friday morning." And she hung up before I could voice another word of protest. I stood in my quiet kitchen, the phone still in my hand, the silence amplifying the insult. It wasn't just dropping the dog off, It was the way she did it, the assumption of my complete compliance, the dismissal of my own plans or needs. They hadn't even considered alternative arrangements. Because why would they, when the free, convenient option, me, was available? A cold resolve began to settle over me, replacing the familiar ache of disappointment. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience anymore. It was a pattern of behavior that showed a fundamental lack of respect. They didn't see me as a person with my own life. They saw me as a resource to be tapped. I walked to my office, a room filled with memories and the quiet order Arthur had always appreciated. I sat at my desk, pulled out a notebook, and began to list. Not just the dog-sitting incident, but everything. The loans that were never quite repaid, the sudden emergencies that required significant checks, the times my home was used without permission, the subtle manipulations and guilt trips. The list grew long, detailing not just financial transactions, but instances of emotional pressure, of being made to feel guilty if I didn't immediately say yes, of my boundaries being casually ignored. Arthur had always handled the finances and legal matters. I'd trusted him implicitly, and he'd set things up carefully. After his death, I'd spent a year getting a handle on everything, meeting with his lawyers, the financial advisor, understanding our assets, investments, and the will. He'd been meticulous, ensuring I was well provided for and that our estate was protected. He'd even, in a conversation I now recalled with stark clarity, expressed quiet concern about David's financial habits and Clara's influence. He'd made suggestions then, things I dismissed as overly cautious, but which now seemed prescient. That evening, I didn't dwell on the injustice of the dog-sitting demand. Instead, I opened the filing cabinet and pulled out the folders Arthur had organized so neatly. Deeds, investment statements, bank records, copies of our wills, power of attorney documents. I spent hours reviewing them, not just to understand the numbers, but to understand the structure Arthur had created, the protections he had put in place for me. The next morning, a Saturday, I called the family lawyer, Mr. Davison. He was an older gentleman, kind and sharp, who had handled our family's legal matters for decades. I explained, calmly and factually, the situation with Buster, framing it not just as an inconvenience, but as the latest example in a long pattern of my son and daughter-in-law taking advantage of my generosity and assuming rights over my property and time. Mr. Davison listened patiently, occasionally asking a clarifying question. When I finished, there was a pause. "Eleanor," he said, using my first name, which he rarely did in a professional context. "Arthur was very clear about his intentions regarding your financial security and the disposition of his estate. He was also perceptive about certain potential challenges. He structured things to give you maximum control and protection during your lifetime. He advised me on concrete steps, reviewing the current will and ensuring it reflected my present wishes, which, after reviewing Arthur's plans and my own growing concerns, had shifted considerably. Ensuring the power of attorney documents were securely held and that no one else had access. Confirming the deeds to the house and other properties were solely in my name. Discussing options for managing my assets in a way that made them less vulnerable to pressure or sudden requests. He mentioned placing properties into a trust, which could offer significant protection, and reviewing beneficiaries on accounts. Most importantly, he validated my feelings. You are under no obligation, legal or moral, to provide free services or unlimited access to your home, Eleanor. Your generosity is a gift, not a right they are entitled to claim." This consultation wasn't just about the dog. It was about taking back control of my life and assets. It was about setting a firm foundation before I made any moves they might misinterpret or try to exploit. I spent the next few days methodically following Mr. Davison's advice. I made an appointment with my financial advisor, a pragmatic woman named Sarah, and instructed her to transfer certain accounts into a more secure structure and to restrict access severely. No information was to be shared with anyone, under any circumstances, without my express written consent. I reviewed and updated my will, making significant changes that reflected the pattern of behavior I had observed. The bulk of the estate would still go to David, eventually, but under conditions that protected it from irresponsible spending or the influence of others. Specific assets, like certain investment portfolios and properties, were now clearly designated with my own future security in mind, not as potential handouts. I also took physical steps. I contacted a locksmith and had all the locks on my house changed. I didn't tell David or Clara I was doing this. It wasn't about keeping them out forever, but about removing the assumption that they had unrestricted access to my home. It was a quiet assertion of ownership and boundaries. I also installed a discreet security camera system focused on entry points, primarily for my own peace of mind, but also, I admitted to myself, to document any unauthorized access attempts. As I went through these steps, a strange sense of calm settled over me. It wasn't anger driving me anymore, but a quiet determination. I wasn't being vengeful. I was being prudent. I was protecting myself, my future, and the legacy Arthur and I had built together. The entitlement I had tolerated for so long had finally pushed me to prioritize my own well-being. The week passed quickly in this methodical preparation. I didn't mention any of it to David or Clara. They called a few times, mostly with last-minute details about Buster, what time they'd arrive. Okay, Mom, so here's his food. The vet's number is on the fridge, just in case. Not that he'll need it, Clara said, dropping a large bag of dog food and a duffel bag of Buster's toys and blanket just inside the door. They didn't bring them further in, didn't ask where would be best. Just deposited them as if this were a kennel reception. We'll call you when we land, David added, giving me a quick, distracted hug. Have a wonderful time, I said, my voice neutral. I looked from David's hurried face to Clara's expectant one. They genuinely seemed to believe everything was perfectly normal, that leaving their dog with me for 3 weeks without a proper discussion was just part of the natural order of things. It was this utter lack of awareness, this ingrained entitlement, that solidified my resolve. Buster, be a good boy, Clara called, already halfway out the door. See you in 3 weeks. And they were gone. Just like that. They left the dog, the food, and their expectations in my hallway and drove off to Bali. Buster, bless him, was a happy, uncomplicated creature. He sniffed around, wagged his tail, and seemed perfectly content as long as he had company and the occasional treat. Spending time with him over the next few days was actually quite pleasant. It gave me quiet time to finish my preparations. I finalized the dog's care. I called an old friend, Martha, who loved dogs and had always wanted a temporary companion. She was thrilled to take Buster for the 3 weeks they were gone, ensuring he was well cared for outside of my home. I arranged to take Buster to her place the day before I planned to leave. And yes, I booked the trip. Not impulsively, but deliberately, using funds from an account Arthur had set up specifically for my personal travel and enjoyment. The Maldives. It felt luxurious, extravagant even, precisely because it was mine and entirely for me. It was a stark contrast to the penny-pinching emergencies I was usually asked to solve. I packed my bags without fanfare. I left no note. Why would I? They hadn't left me a note explaining the arrangements they had made for me. I made sure all the windows were locked, the new security system armed, the doors bolted. My house was secure, my affairs were in order. Buster was safe with Martha. The morning of my flight, I had a leisurely breakfast, walked Buster over to Martha's, saw him happily settle in, and then drove myself to the airport. As the plane took off, lifting me away from the familiar landscape, I felt a profound sense of lightness and freedom. I hadn't run away, I had simply chosen myself. I had removed myself from a situation where I was being taken advantage of, using the resources and protections Arthur had provided for me. 3 weeks later, refreshed and with a peaceful tan, I landed back in my home city. I didn't go straight home. I spent a night at a comfortable hotel, easing back into the time zone. I checked my phone. There were numerous missed calls and messages. Most were from David, some from Clara. They had arrived back from Bali late the previous night. Their initial messages were mildly confused. "Mom? We're here, where are you?" Followed by "the key isn't under the mat," and "Mom, did you change the locks?" The next messages were laced with rising panic and frustration. "Mom, it's really late. Where's Buster?" And us. They had apparently assumed they would stay at my house for a few days upon return. "Call us back. This isn't funny. Where's the dog? Mom, are you okay? Why aren't you answering?" Finally, an angry voicemail from Clara. "Mom, this is ridiculous. We left Buster with you. You were supposed to be here. Where are you? Where's Buster? We have nowhere to go." I listened to the messages with a serene detachment I wouldn't have thought possible a month ago. Their panic was palpable, a direct result of their own entitled assumptions. They had treated my home as a free service, and now that service wasn't available. They had planned their trip, their dog care, and even their return stay around my presumed availability, and I had simply not been available. I decided to call David first. "Mom, where are you?" he exclaimed, relief momentarily overcoming his frustration. "I'm home now, dear," I said calmly. "Just settling back in." "Home? But we went to the house last night and you weren't there. The locks were changed. Where's Buster?" "Oh, yes," I said. "About that. You left Buster with me for 3 weeks without asking if I was available. I had plans that I decided not to cancel. Plans that involved leaving town." Silence. "But you said you'd be there," David stammered. "I said I'd be here that morning," I corrected gently. "When you dropped him off. I didn't confirm that I would be staying here for 3 weeks and caring for Buster. You assumed I would. But you always do," he blurted out, the entitlement raw and unfiltered. And there it was. The heart of the matter. "You always do." My past generosity had become a future obligation in their eyes. "David," I said, my voice firm but quiet. "My always doing is not a contract. My home is not a free hotel or a kennel. My time is not indefinitely available for your convenience. You made arrangements that required my presence and resources without confirming with me. I made arrangements that required my absence, using my own resources and deciding how I wanted to spend my time. But where is Buster?" he demanded, panic returning. "Buster is perfectly fine," I assured him. "He's been staying with my friend Martha, who was delighted to have him. I made sure he was well cared for before I left." You got someone else to watch him?" David sounded genuinely bewildered. "Why didn't you just tell us you didn't want to do it?" "Because I wanted you to understand the consequences of making unilateral decisions about my life," I said, cutting straight to the truth. "You presumed upon my good nature and my resources one too many times." I wasn't angry, David. I was disappointed. And I decided it was time to remind you, and Clara, that I am not a free service provider. I have my own life, my own plans, and my own right to decide how I spend my time and use my home. I paused, letting that sink in. "I'll arrange for you to pick Buster up from Martha later today. And I think it's best if you make other arrangements for where you'll stay. The locks have been changed, and I need some quiet time after my trip." The line was silent for a long moment. I could almost hear David processing the fact that his mother, the perennial rescuer and available resource, had simply opted out. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat. "You went on a trip?" "While we were in Bali." "Yes," I said. "I went to the Maldives. It was beautiful." I didn't offer apologies or explanations. I didn't express guilt. I had nothing to feel guilty about. I had acted responsibly, secured their dog's care, and most importantly, secured my own peace and property. The next day, David came to pick up Buster. He was subdued, Clara noticeably absent. He muttered an apology, which sounded more like a reluctant acknowledgement that his plan had failed than genuine remorse. I accepted it quietly, handed him Buster's leash and duffel bag, which had remained untouched in the hallway, and watched him drive away with the dog. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There weren't tears or shouting matches. The victory wasn't loud. It was quiet, internal. It was the knowledge that I had taken back control, not through anger, but through deliberate, strategic action. I had shown them, without yelling or ultimatums, that my resources and my availability were not theirs by right. In the following weeks, communication was tentative and strained. There were no more casual demands. Requests for help were phrased politely, almost cautiously, and I responded with careful consideration, sometimes saying yes if it was truly something I chose to do, and often, gracefully, saying no. I maintained the new locks, the security system, and the clear boundaries around my home and finances. My home felt like mine again. My time felt like mine again. The cold knot in my stomach had unraveled, replaced by a quiet strength. The Maldives trip wasn't just a vacation, it was the symbol of my renewed independence, a testament to the fact that I was no longer defined by my family's expectations, but by my own choices and my own peace. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, give this video a like if you haven't already, and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself.